inbound marketing and content marketing firm specializing in B2B tech. She's a former director of online marketing at Tandberg, which was acquired by Cisco, and director of demand generation at Blackboard. Margie, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So just to kick it off, if you had to explain what you do to my grandmother, who doesn't go on the internet, what would you tell her?
So even your grandmother is a shopper, right? A consumer shopper that has to make choices among different products and services and figure out which company she wants to serve which type of product or service. So what I do is help brands or companies that sell to business buyers stand out so that they're a really clear choice, and buyers can figure out what it is that makes them unique and special, so they feel more connected to them and ultimately choose them as the right decision to help them meet their goals.
Got it. So give us some examples of B2B buyer triggers.
Yeah, so B2B buyers, I mean, unlike consumer buyers in the grandmother example, B2B buying cycles are much longer, much more complex, and involve a lot more people. There's also a lot more risk. So there's many potential triggers that can kick off the beginning of that cycle, and then there's little triggers along the way that keep it going. So triggers could be internal or external. So an example of an internal trigger might be organization going through a restructuring, right? Or just it doesn't have enough people to do all the work they need to do, and they're sick of all the manual effort and tedious effort. Or they don't have enough expertise to get the work done that they need to do. So therefore they need to go look outside for some kind of solution to help them with sort of their internal problems. An external trigger. Yeah.
Go ahead. External triggers. Let's hear that.
Yeah, I was going to say, external triggers are things that happen outside of the organization, in the marketplace, possibly a technical trend, or in the set of companies I work with a lot of cybersecurity companies. There's often a compliance or a legal mandate that has changed that causes everybody to scramble and figure out a new way to solve that challenge and meet those requirements. Or it could be a new competitor has come into the market and suddenly everybody's, scurrying around trying to figure out where they fit. So those are things that happen external to the organization. They weren't expecting, but they have to react to them. And so those are things that might kick off sort of a company thinking, okay, I have this problem. I need to make a change. Let me look around and see how I can solve.
Was the pandemic a trigger? Were there triggers? Have you seen triggers come out of the pandemic in the cybersecurity space?
Of course. I mean, virtually everything, right, over the last year has changed. And some organizations have benefited from it in the sense that there's more demand for their products and services, right? And some have suffered. So, just the idea that everybody is working from home, we were all getting used to the occasional working from home and using your own device and, connecting remotely, but not to the degree that we have today where, literally everybody is working from home, but still needs to connect to the same products and, applications that they would normally have access to inside the office.
But
so think about all that.
When we get news of like a big data breach, or when you start to see a wave of phishing scams pop up, how does that impact the B2B brands that you're advising? Do they market against that?
Yeah. So, for example, a business is thinking about, how do I secure what a business might call their endpoint, which is essentially my laptop, right, or my computer that all of my employees are using. How do I best secure that so that when they're working remotely and they click on a link in a phishing email, right, that doesn't automatically download some application to their work device that that's then going to infiltrate my entire organization, right? So they're thinking about these problems, and there are cybersecurity tools and solutions that will help to kind of solve that use case and block that potential increase in phishing attacks, for example, from getting inside an organization.
Can
So
you give me a
that's one
specific example of something that you're working on with a cybersecurity tech client, where a specific news break or something that happened caused them to take a turn in their branding strategy?
I mean, not so much the branding strategy as, because a branding strategy, I think, is more ultimately sort of the bedrock and a consistent almost infrastructure piece in a company's go-to-market strategy. So their brand probably stays consistent, but they may need to take advantage of the fact that there's this trigger in the market and people are concerned about this particular thing, like the SolarWinds breach that just happened. Suddenly everybody has this top of mind, it's in the news. They know that people are going to be searching on this term, right? So we may create some content, or we may do something on social media, that it really explains how to solve this problem that's currently in the news, with the solution that already existed. But, in cybersecurity, there's just a constant stream of these types of data breaches and activities that are happening. So, it's sort of like it's another day and another angle to get at the same story. But fundamentally, it doesn't change the brand. What the brand stands for is, defending personal information or protecting against a data breach. It's just an example to hook into what people are talking about right now. And that sometimes makes it easier to enter a conversation because people are already thinking about those things in their terms, in their words, and you can sort of start from the context of where they're thinking about the problem.
What are some of the disconnects between the customer journey from the buyer's and the seller's standpoint?
Well, to pick up, I guess, on that last comment about the customer context, many times brands are thinking that the story starts with them, right? That they woke up one day and decided to enter the conversation, and that's where the story begins. But in fact, the customer's buyer journey began long before they ever encountered the brand in whatever context they've been working in. Maybe they've been struggling with this problem for a long time. Maybe they had another solution that they, tried and it didn't work out. They have other tools that they use that are part of their world. So the disconnect, I think, is that the customer is coming at this problem from their own context and sort of their own status quo. And then the brand sort of enters the conversation in the middle of the journey, but doesn't always recognize the role that they play in the customer setting.
And so how should brands map their storytelling to different stages of the marketing funnel?
I think of a storytelling framework really as having kind of maybe three different core elements to every story, right? There's setting, which we talked about a little bit before, sort of what's the world that the customer is living in today? What are their goals for the future? That's sort of the context or the setting. And then you have the characters. So the customer is the hero of their journey, and the world is sort of through their eyes. The brand comes along and plays a role in that journey as almost a character in the story. And then you have the plot. So we're kind of getting from point A to point Z. A is the starting point of the story where you're kind of in the status quo, right? The world as it is, maybe a trigger comes along. And Z is ultimately the vision of success, the future nirvana, right, that you have at the end. So everything in between there is the plot. And then it's got tons of ups and downs. And that's what makes a story interesting. So when I map a storytelling structure for a brand, and I look at it in sort of, the traditional kinds of marketing stages or sales cycle stages, like, you've got awareness, you've got consideration, you've got justification. But I look at what's happening, what are the ups and downs and decision making and the questions that customers ask at each point in that cycle, because those are really points of inflection where somebody can get stuck along the story. You put the book down, you never go back to it or think about it again. Or are you interested enough to turn the chapter, continue on the journey, and eventually make it to that that final end, which ultimately for most B2B companies is then, the closed won sale. And then, there could be a sequel to that story after that, what happens after that. But the first major milestone of the first sale is ultimately, where we want to accelerate the storytelling journey to.
Let's talk for a minute about branding, because I know that's something that you do for B2B tech companies. When it comes to something like search engine optimization, where you're basically trying to get found against a popular search term, a high volume search term. What do you do if a high volume term that's indicative of what you sell is off brand? You think about, like, the famous example is, cheap seats, and
Right.
and I think it was the Southwest Airlines that said, no, we don't do cheap seats. We're the low cost leader. And then the SEO guy said, well, okay, if you don't do cheap seats, here's the lost revenue there for the person who does do cheap seats. And they said, okay, when it comes to SEO, we do cheap seats. When it comes to advertising, we're the low cost leader. So when you think about branding and online marketing, are there limits? Are there areas where, we don't, when it comes to branding, when it comes to SEO, we don't go there. When it comes to social, we let the market decide. How do you figure that out? What's that rubric?
Well, I do listen very carefully to the words that customers or prospective buyers use when they're describing their problem, when they're looking for a solution, right? I mean, if you're trying to do SEO, you want to reflect those words. Really, in any kind of marketing, we want to reflect those words back to them so that they feel that connection. But in SEO in particular, those are the words that are getting searched on. That's the reality, like it or not. So, you might bid on those words, right? And you might then, in your advertising or in sort of your landing page or your experience, you can build on that initial knowledge by, sort of broadening the definition of what you're presenting. I had an interesting conversation with a client over the last couple of weeks about the difference between easy and simple. Since you brought up cheap, cheap sounds cheap. Low cost sounds a little bit more refined, right? But cheap makes it sound like it's going to break the day that you buy it. It's the same thing with easy and simple. I mean, something should be easy to use. I mean, that's sort of the baseline that we're all hoping for technology products, whether it's B2B or B2C. Simple, which sounds a little bit like easy, is actually more like basic. They didn't want to say simple because they said, well, we're comprehensive, we're mature, we're in depth. We're not simple. We might be easy to use. So these we spend a lot of time thinking about nuances of words in the way that we present marketing messages and explain marketing messages. But I still think, just realistically from an SEO perspective, if the data is telling you that this is the word people are searching on, you want to take advantage of that and then sort of bring people over to your messaging and way of thinking.
In the world of branding, often there's a brand guide that is distributed to the folks in marketing to make sure everyone is, compliant with the brand style. But something like conversion optimization, where, tweaking a color or changing a background or using a different font can actually impact conversions. What do you do in that situation? Have you ever been in the situation where, like, the conversion optimization person says, you know what, the brand guide is killing me. I can't.
Yes.
Talk us through that.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. Conversion or demand gen people sort of versus branding people maybe have slightly different goals, right? And that's where the difference and the fine line between brand personality or brand voice can differ from tone. Because your brand voice or your brand personality is really consistent. I mean, that's sort of the core of who you are as a brand. That's the person, that's the character that you embody in your customer's story, right? So that's sort of 80% of that is the same. Tone is where you can kind of change that dial a little bit. So, if you're dealing with a demand gen situation, you need to sort of ramp up that like level of urgency to get people to click on that button, you may need to turn that dial a little bit, right? But if you're dealing with, I don't know, an email that you're sending in a customer technical support situation, and you're trying to sound like the brand voice and you're writing, you're not going to use the same kind of tone as you would in a demand gen situation, because you're dealing with a customer who's maybe a little upset or has a problem that they need to solve. So you're going to turn that down a little bit and show a little more sympathy or empathy. So when I create a brand guide for customers, we bring in a lot of different examples of how the brand is used in real life scenario. So how might it be used in a social media post? How might it be used in a white paper or in a website format or in a customer service email, to kind of reflect some of the core key messages that the company wants to use sort of as messaging pillars. And then we kind of put words to it and examples of, what is too much, what is not enough. How might you word this a different way to reflect the brand personality? And it's those examples and bringing it to life and making it really realistic for the people that actually have to put words to paper and to get their job done, I think is the most helpful thing in making the brand consistent across all these touch points. And not having everybody, make it up every single time, because then that's when people start to interpret things in different ways, and it starts getting kind of sloppy and inconsistent.
So I'm grateful to you for sharing your experience with me and with my listeners. So let's talk about gratitude. Name 3 professionals that you're grateful to for where you are today.
Oh, well, I've got 2 immediate ones. I might have to think about the third for a minute. So I'll give a shout out to there's a woman named Jean Rosauer. She's currently CMO of a company called ID Me, which if you haven't heard about, you will. Very interesting company. But she was my boss for 6 or 7 years when I was at Tandberg, the video conferencing company, and really taught me a lot about B2B marketing in general. And then she began her consulting practice before she went back in-house, before I did, and kind of inspired me also to go out on my own. I've been a consultant for 8 years now with my own business. And I think seeing somebody go and do that first really gave me sort of the confidence to go and kind of launch, try my own wings. So that's sort of a personal, that was just very personal to me. The other person I would say is Doug Kessler, Velocity Partners. Some people may know him. He's,
he was on our sister podcast in the most episode. And if you want to download that, it's called the Earned Media Podcast. And it was a fascinating discussion.
Mm-hmm. He just writes like nobody's watching. He just writes like it's straight out of his head, and it's very real and very human. And sometimes when I get stuck of a way to say something, or I just need a fresh new idea, I follow his blog, and I did have the opportunity to meet him. I was a little bit of a fangirl, but I think he's pretty cool.
Awesome. If you want to do more business online, you don't need more traffic. You need the right traffic. So before you run out and start using paid media or social media to invite the world over to your website, check out the Guide to the Digital Pivot. The Guide to the Digital Pivot explains why you'd be smart to shift to a sequential Maslowian approach to owned, shared, and earned media. Because whoever controls the layout controls the payout. The Guide to the Digital Pivot is a practical guide for pivoting your business or career to digital. And you can download your free copy at ericschwartzman.com/pivot-guide. Like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's a hierarchical approach to implementing digital marketing. To be successful, you have to satisfy your basic needs first. Get the Guide to the Digital Pivot at ericschwartzman.com/pivot-guide and make this year the year you start winning leads, deals, and new business online. Margie, Let's talk for a minute about the role of PR in branding. How does what you do, how do you collaborate with PR people? What is their role in the process of defining a brand?
PR people, their main audience, I've found, in terms of presenting the brand externally, is more to the media, right? They're looking to get through the media, gain attention of other buyers, but really ultimately they're looking to appeal to journalists and media who are interested in, something topical, something kind of provocative, something that's going to stand out from the noise. So it's one piece of a marketing and branding strategy. And so I may partner with them to say, well, they may come to me and say, the journalists have been asking about this topic, right? Do you have anything to say about this particular issue, like the SolarWinds breach that's in the news? Who do we have, that we can put in front of them? But they don't know ultimately, they don't know the business as intimately, or the products or the services of the business. And so part of what I do is help to kind of package and position the services or the products of a client, so that the PR firm knows sort of a little bit what box to put them in, which journalists to go to.
Wow, that was really something. I guess I clicked, we're using a new platform, Restrand,
Okay.
and I guess I
We were
clicked
invaded.
So there,
I was like flying through the virtual Neverland. It was very soothing music.
I was tripping out there, and I'm like clicking everything frantically, trying to figure it out. Okay, so we were talking about let's take
PR
the
firms.
question over, and I'll cut that whole part out.
Okay.
Good. Okay. So what role do PR agencies play in the branding process?
PR agencies are partners to the work that I do. They're really trying to get the word out through the channel of media, right? So their first audience is the journalist or the editor who's trying to decide, whether this is worthy of whether a story that we're pitching is worthy to include, right, in their publication, and something they want to share, or something they want to write about, or people they want to interview, right, as experts. So I work tightly with a PR firm. They're the ones that have the relationships with the journalists, right, and really understand the art of the pitch. They also hear from journalists about what topics they're most interested in reporting on, what the trends are, what might be getting the most pickup. So they're sort of that best avenue to the media. Then my job, I work closely with, say, the product marketing team or the product management team, or in-house subject matter experts to sort of package up all the knowledge that the company has, and kind of position the products and services that they sell to fit them into the story that the PR firm is pitching to the journalists.
So it's interesting. Let's talk for a minute about alignment, which is sort of a hot topic. This idea that, marketing shouldn't be creating content in an ivory tower. They should be informed by people on the front line. Talk to us about the role of sales and customer service in branding.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. So just as the PR firm is the best avenue to the journalists. Sales team is front and center every day, talking to customers, hearing their objections, getting the door slammed, right? And also hearing why people are interested. So they are a fantastic partner for marketing. And they look at the world in a very different way. So it's good to have their perspective on what customers are saying to them. Same with customer service. They're the ones often hearing from the unhappy customers and the ones that are having problems with implementation or want to achieve something with the products that maybe isn't ready yet. So marketing is sort of that hub, right? Where we're getting the story from, from PR, we're getting it from sales, we're getting it from the technical support, the sales engineers, all these are sort of feeding in, and marketing has to sort of sift through all these different stories and look for patterns and then find ways to message and position the company in order to address the concerns that they're hearing. And that's, it's often a balancing act, and consistency is hugely important because we don't want to be hearing something from the sales team or, pitching something or putting out a campaign that promises something that the product won't deliver. Right. So we need to hear from the product side of the house why a certain feature or function is important, and how this might be different from what they've seen elsewhere in the market, when it's going to be ready. We need to know what we can deliver on, and then we take all that information in and I guess sift through that technical side in a way that then can be consumed by both the sales team and ultimately their customers, which means just like we talked about in the beginning, breaking down these complex kinds of ideas for somebody who is not an engineer or a developer and, not living in the product every day. And so marketing is like that translator, I think, between the product people and the sales people oftentimes.
Talk to us a little bit about the role of branding in B2B content marketing.
So a great piece of content is going to tell a story, all right, and speak to a customer needs, but also showcase what is different and unique about the brand that produced it. So in an ideal world, if you took a piece of content that you created, I'm not the first one to say this, right? If you took a piece of content that you created that you're really proud of, a white paper or a website, and you took the logo off of it, the question is really, would people know that it was you and your company that put that together? Or would they just say, this sounds just like everybody else? I can't tell. Like Doug Kessler, I know I'm talking to him. I'm talking to him, right? So if you can make your brand sound sort of more like a person in the words and the word choice, everything about the content that you produce, then it builds consistency and familiarity and trust with the audience that's reading it. So they know what to expect from you, and they get more of a sense of who your company is, what you stand for, how you sound, what the people are like, before they've even met you. And content has to do that job, 6, 7, 8 touches before somebody ever talks to a human being from the organization. So that's really ultimately, a heavy weight on the shoulders of content to be able to represent the brand before.
In the world of cybersecurity, marketing and branding, where I know, I'll let you do that. Hold on.
I'm sorry. I thought I had turned it. I thought you needed to cut that off. I'm so sorry. I thought I turned it off. For our live listeners, this is live.
To our live listener. Okay. Our live listener. Our one live listener. Okay. Maybe we'll have some replays. But anyway, we're just pulling the audio for the podcast. I've made a note to cut this banter out of the show. All right. In B2B growth marketing, where growth is the primary objective, what considerations come to mind when you think about branding those types of growth-focused organizations?
That's a really interesting question. So tell me a little more, what's driving the question? What are you thinking about?
Well, I'm thinking about so many of the companies in Silicon Valley that put growth before profits in a winner takes all market to try and own a category. And often those organizations are able to secure VC funding as long as they can show growth, even if customer acquisition costs leave them in the red. So have you ever worked with, and examples are, Uber, Airbnb, winners obviously are Google and Facebook. They're there already. But the idea is, hey, we've identified a category. How do we own that category before anyone else even gets a start?
Sure. Well, I have definitely worked with startups that are VC funded and are looking for high growth and customer acquisition dollars above all else, right? As opposed to sort of longevity and customer satisfaction and kind of stable infrastructure. And what I've seen happen in those cases is, well, first of all, the people inside the company get very burnt out because they're constantly shifting direction, right? I mean, the decision on Monday and the way we're talking about our product and even possibly the products that we sell, right? And what the products do changes between Monday and Wednesday because the goal is just make everybody happy and get as many sales in the door as possible, and as opposed to thinking about sort of the long-term run of the company. So that's damaging to the people inside the company because, and eventually they turn over, which hurts the brand and the employer brand of the company. And then the customers, you find out when you go to do case studies or you're looking for customer testimonials that you can't find the happy customer, you can't find a happy, satisfied customer that implemented and met their goals. So that it catches up with you. You might have a really good year or two, right? But then it catches up with you once the word gets out that you're not able to kind of continue that engine. So, I've seen that piece happen. But it is frustrating, if I come to a company and say, look, we're going to spend 6 months on a branding project, and they've got demand gen goals to meet and VC goals to meet, that's not going to fly for a small company. You've got to be able to sort of build the infrastructure at the same time, drive the car at the same time that you're changing the wheel. So we've got to sort of have some short-term wins and some short-term things that actually we learn from, and then say, okay, well that didn't work. So we're going to go back and, think about a different way of messaging and try a different type of campaign. So we can't just sit back and have analysis paralysis for 6 months.
Margie,
but at the same time, we can't let that go, right? That's fundamentally the most important thing that we can do.
Really quick, because we're almost out of time. Name 3 B2B tech brands with amazing results. 3 B2B tech brands you think are great.
So one is Slack. I think that's a terrific brand that's an amazing job of being consistent and having a distinct brand voice across so many touch points, from its web presence to the interactions that people have with the product. I don't know if it's cheating to say Salesforce and Salesforce for spot Slack, but let's say Salesforce has done a really great job of evolving over time. It was a brand that was one of the first SaaS kinds of brands. You remember they had that, no software kind of logo thing, which sort of seems ridiculous now because every software company is a SaaS company, and probably that's emerging today. So, but now their tagline is something like, we bring people and companies together, which is really what Salesforce does. It's the hub among all these different companies. So I think they've done a terrific job of repositioning over time to kind of keep their brand in sync with how people think about them. I'm trying to think of one in a totally different market entirely.
Anyone in cybersecurity?
Actually, I'll do one in ed tech, which is another area that I do some work on. There's a company called iStation or Imagination Station. It's still a B2B brand in that it sells to schools, and And they have a branding kind of logo and campaign called the Red Cape, where essentially they're making all the children that use their solution for language learning superheroes. And so part of their distribution is they provide these red capes for the kids that are using the products. And what this did was really kind of get people excited about wearing the cape. And so they would take pictures and post themselves on social media. And when everybody sat down for their, their annual reading test, they put all the kids in their red capes so they felt like superheroes. And, it was sort of this really like interesting, organic, customer driven kind of brand that took off even without the company sort of implementing it, or saying you were all going to do this. It was like customer driven. So it felt much more natural and authentic.
Margie, if people want to get a hold of you, where should they go?
Best place is my website. It's centerboard-marketing.com. And I'd love to hear from people on there, or my LinkedIn profile is great as well.
Margie Agin, founder and chief strategist at Centerboard Marketing. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much. It was really fun.